Today on Something You Should Know, need to come up with a really good idea? There's a place in town you can go right now to get one. Plus, how and why we like what we like.
One researcher suggested to me, when you go to a restaurant, if you want to create something memorable, order something new, because that's going to leave a stronger memory. If you want to sort of anticipate and enjoy the experience more in the moment, order something you've had before.
We'll examine why you like what you like and why your favorites are your favorites. And passive-aggressive behavior. We've all done it, but there are consequences.
And so let's not mistake that getting even with someone is getting ahead with someone.
You'll hear from psychologist and Congressman Tim Murphy on this. And I'm going to tell you how to win almost every time at rock, paper, scissors, according to science. All this today on Something You Should Know.
Something you should know. Fascinating intel, the world's top experts, and practical advice you can use in your life today. The Something You Should Know podcast with Mike Carruthers.
Hi, welcome. It is another episode of the Something You Should Know podcast. Glad to have you here. So you need to come up with a good idea. Maybe you're a writer, or you have a presentation to make, or you have a speech to give, and you need that spark, that something to get the creative juices flowing. Where do you get it? Well, one place you should head to is the neighborhood coffee shop. Why? Because of the noise in there. Researchers have found that the level of noise that matches the bustle of a coffee shop, which is around 70 decibels, spurs more creative performance than the quiet of, say, 50 decibels, or the very loud and distracting blender volume of about 85 decibels. It turns out that silence is good for focus, but it's not so good for creativity. That noise level in a coffee shop gives your thinking what's called processing disfluency. That is, it gives your mind this slight difficulty in your experience of processing information. And that little wrinkle, that little difficulty rankles your thinking in a positive way, and it results in more creative ideas. And that is something you should know. What's your favorite color? Most people say blue. And the second most, I think, is red. But why? Why do we have a favorite color? Why do we like what we like? It's actually a fascinating question, and here to discuss it is Tom Vanderbilt. Tom is the author of a book called You May Also Like, Taste in an Age of Endless Choice. Welcome, Tom. And it seems to me that the question of why do we like what we like, it's an interesting question, but it is somewhat answerless, that, we like what we like because we like what we like. So why is this even worthy of a book or a discussion? Don't we just like what we like?
I think sometimes, we actually don't know why we like what we like, or we might even not really like the things we like as much as we do, or there might be things that we think we don't like that we actually might like if we only kind of could get to them, but sometimes those things we think we dislike get in the way of our actual liking, if that's not too many uses of the word like there.
Well, yeah. So tell me how you thought, let's take a look at what people's tastes are and why they have them. I mean, where did that even come from? It seems so out of the blue, but yet so fascinating.
Yeah, I think I have this interest in everyday things that are around us that are so obvious, but they're so obvious that we almost don't think about them. My last book was about traffic, about basically sitting in cars and wondering, what was happening out there in the world around us. But this book, my daughter basically one day on the way to school just asked me, what my favorite color was. And she had been going through this whole thing that a lot of 4- and 5-year-olds go through, just being obsessed with kind of what favorite things were of their classmates. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? And I think for them, they're just trying to figure out their identity and who they are. But this simple question just sort of, I had to come up with an answer, and that answer was blue. And that's a pretty popular answer. In fact, the most popular answer if you ask people. So, but I just sort of wondered, do I really have a favorite color? Did I just say blue because she asked me? And I started to wonder about all sorts of other things in the world out there: music, food, movies, art, and things that nowadays you're asked to kind of express your opinion in all kinds of ways, from Facebook pages onward. But so that simple question from a 4-year-old kind of set me off on this path.
Yeah, well, if someone were to ask me what my favorite color is, I would probably say blue too, as I guess most people do. But I don't know that it's really my favorite. I mean, I like all the color. I don't have any big allegiance to blue.
I mean, what often happens, there's something called availability bias that psychologists talk about. Sometimes the thing that's most obvious in our minds is the thing that springs to mind when we're asked a question like that. So, but this kind of ties into what one theory is to why we might like the color blue the most, which is that it's been called the ecological valence theory, and that's just a fancy way of saying basically we like the colors most of the things we like the most in the world. And blue, has some pretty good things going for it. You have the sky, water. The images of blue are quite positive. Red is the second most popular, and that that has some good things too. But they've done experiments where if you kind of show people pictures of negative red things like wounds with blood, people's liking for red will go down slightly. And you can play with this in all sorts of pretty fun ways, showing Republicans blue, Democrats red, and especially if you're on election day, those likes and dislikes will go up for each of those colors.
So when somebody likes, say, a movie or a book or a TV show and somebody else doesn't, what's going on there? What is it? I mean, objectively, you should be able to say this is good and this is not so good, but we all differ on all these things.
I mean, this is why philosophers, since David Hume, going back several hundred years, have just been wrestling with this question of taste. And we all know the expression, there's no accounting for taste. And usually when we say that, we're never talking about our own taste. We're talking about someone else's taste because we think they like something that, shouldn't really be liked. So, there's no accounting for taste. But no, this is a mystery. And a company like Netflix, has put so much energy into trying to come up with mathematical equations that will determine your own, help guide you through the huge world of all the movies in the world through some kind of mathematical way based on what you've seen before, based on what other people who seem to like the things you like have also seen, and kind of mix this up in this huge stew. But sometimes at the end of the day, you just cannot tell. There are things that movies that an algorithm on Netflix would tell me that I really should like that were kind of underwhelming for me. Maybe there's something that was kind of a surprise like for me. So, if it were really that predetermined, companies and would have a lot easier time. But at the end of the day, there is still this kind of question of just personal taste, and especially in things like art and books. It's a lot easier to go on Amazon and you're buying a laundry detergent or something, and it's kind of easier to say, 4.5 stars, a lot of people like that laundry detergent, it must be pretty good. It's harder to do that with a movie, because even if a lot of other people liked it, you still might not like it for your own quite personal reasons.
But if something on Amazon has 4.5 stars, that means somebody didn't like it, or didn't like it as much as everybody else liked it, or it would have gotten 5 stars, so something went wrong there.
Exactly, and there's some interesting dynamics that people who have analyzed all this data that is on Amazon, all those sorts of thumbs up and stars. For example, when a book wins a big award, something weird happens on Amazon where after it wins, this is actually on Goodreads where people review books, but when that book wins the award, the stars for it on Goodreads actually go down. So you think, this book was great. It was chosen as a best book of the year. But what happens is, one of two things the researchers speculated. One is that it kind of lifts the expectations, like, wow, this is a book that's amazing. I really better like this because it's an award winner. So sometimes people go in with these inflated expectations. The other thing that happens is just the news of that award kind of puts the book out there in the world and brings more people to it that might not have chosen to read that book otherwise. And it might not be their sort of cup of tea as much, and they're kind of more disappointed by it. So this is where sometimes publicity can be a bad thing for an artist if it sort of brings them a lot of people who actually, in the end, don't really like what they're doing. So just another one of the complicated dynamics that's out there.
One of the things that always fascinates me is things like restaurants where they're very popular and then they're not, and they're very expensive, but really, the food is good, but it's not that much better than, the neighborhood bistro. And tastes seem to change, and people like a restaurant, then they don't like it. What's that all about? I
mean, there's so much going on there. I mean, now, because of things like Yelp and the internet, we have so many chances to read about something before we go. Before, it was a little bit of a hazier process. Like maybe one friend told you it was good, but now we can sift through 500 reviews of that. So, maybe you're reading all these reviews that have built up this place again, and maybe those reviews were from a little while ago, and maybe the service, maybe it's become so popular, the restaurant, that their service isn't quite keeping up. So you go and you kind of have you're like, wow, why do people like this so much? Sometimes even the price of a place, you sort of go to an expensive restaurant prepared to pay a lot of money, and just the thought that you're paying all that money, you kind of think in the back of your head, well, this must be pretty good. So you're swayed by that. I mean, we've seen this with, economists have done these blind taste tests of wine, and this is pretty famous, but, sometimes the cheap bottles actually do better than the more expensive bottles in blind taste tests. I mean, does this mean that people are stupid to pay the higher price? I mean, it's a complicated question, because if you drink it in a non-blind taste test and you see that it's this wine from 1976 in this region of France, I mean, that kind of helps you like it even more. I mean, taste, what I'm trying to say is taste is not just about what's on your tongue. I mean, there's a lot going on in your brain that can help you like something or help you not like something. And so to say, maybe you should only drink cheap wine, it's a tricky question.
How much weight does a personal recommendation, either positive or negative, weigh against, 500 reviews on Yelp?
Psychologists use this example with food. If you're eating an apple and suddenly it's been the best apple you've had, but all of a sudden at one of the last bites you see a worm, that's going to sort of color your experience of eating that apple, and it's not going to be a great experience in the end. So it is funny how, just one review can really throw off. I mean, I think people generally go with the aggregate. If you see 5 stars, but one of the last reviews was negative, especially with things that are a little bit more personal, people will look for reasons why that person had that one reaction that was so different from all the other reactions. It might be that something kind of a little bit vague, like, well, the hostess just wasn't that nice. I mean, it seems like a lot of other people thought the hostess was fine. So, but this is kind of life nowadays. We have to try to sit there and disentangle all these things and try to figure out who is telling the truth and whose opinion really matters. And sometimes by the time I've read through 500 reviews, not that I usually do that many, but I don't even want to go to the place anymore because I just can't decide. So this is one of the problems.
Well, I've heard somebody recommended that when you read reviews for a restaurant that you don't read the 5 stars and you don't read the 1 stars. You read the ones in the middle because that's where you're going to get the real info.
That's a great point. Because, I mean, clearly often the 1-star people are grinding some kind of axe. The 5-star people might be either their standards are just too kind of easy, or it might, I mean, here's the other problem. It might just be a completely planted review, a fake review. Yelp's own filters reject about 1/4 of all reviews that are posted. So, people trying to prop up their business or drag down another business. And so, I mean, that's, what you describe is that like 3 to 4, 2 range is kind of where the most honest opinions, I think, are being, and usually most useful, kind of the mixed review.
I want to talk about, because it's the title of your book, that whole concept of you may also like, which happens whenever we buy something online. Before we check out, we're given this array of things we might also want to buy before we check out. It must be effective or they wouldn't do it, right?
Absolutely, because, I mean, people say, well, an algorithm, a machine can't tell me what my taste is. But all these algorithms are really just math that's using people's past decisions, people that actually in their buying habits work sort of like you. So they're not just, people often think that it's a computer coming up with some, kind of idea on its own. It's not the case at all. So, the thing I discovered is, people are really pretty predictable in their tastes. I mean, if you look at, well, you can go to Google.com, their ad preferences section, and they'll sort of tell you who they think you are based on your browsing history. And it's pretty, it's pretty accurate. There's all sorts of things like this online now. One of my favorite is called What's Your Stereotype? It's something that Spotify does, and you can type in, your listening habits. So they'll actually just automatically generate your listening habits based on what you've been listening to, and they'll give you like a little funny, caricature of who you are. Like mine was called Hipster Barista. So, and they showed this guy in a coffee shop, and that, pretty much was pretty spot on as far as describing me. So,
Is it your sense that these algorithms and these, you may also likes, are these reflecting tastes, or are these steering tastes?
I think both. I mean, I certainly have been pointed to things that I wouldn't have bought otherwise through that. So, again, in this age of endless choice, it's hard for us to really ever have a sense of everything that's available to us. I mean, the number of new products that are released in any category, books, just to name one, goes up every year. There's now something like 50,000 new books released a year. How would you ever, average American, I think, reads one book a year. So how would you pick that one book out of 50,000? You really need to be pointed to these things. I mean, there are problems. Sometimes you get things that are just so widely recommended, they're kind of useless. You have a kid in your house, so you bought a Harry Potter book, and then you kind of get recommended other Harry Potter books. It's not really that surprising of a recommendation. I mean, I think where the strength comes out is when it's pulling out things that you may really not have found in another way, and that's where I really try to use it the most.
When the dust all settles from this, as you look at all this research and all these tactics that retailers use and all these choices we have, I mean, has your buying decisions, have they been altered now? Are you like on to them kind of thing?
A little bit, I think, but I mean, the real takeaway for me was just basically trying to figure out strategies for ways to like things more and to be happier with the choices I made, because there's just, again, reading these reviews, you can sort of buy something and then suddenly you read a negative review and you're like, did I make the wrong choice? But trying to find a hotel, spending an hour looking through things. So I've just been trying. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from a judge at the Great American Beer Festival. That's a big craft beer festival where they sample hundreds of beers. So I asked them, you guys know the entire world of beer. There's hundreds of beers out there. How do you ever figure out what you're going to drink, what you're really going to like drinking, what you're going to enjoy the most? And one judge said, well, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite beer? And he said, I don't have a favorite beer. It's the beer that happens to be in my hand at the moment, because that's what sounded good to me. And so at the end of the day, I think you do have to kind of go back to what your own impulses is and just try to be happy with that. And we can still use all these tools to great advantage, but at the end of the day, you need to make your own decisions.
Lastly, what, if we haven't talked about it already, was the most interesting or useful or fascinating tidbit that you discovered in looking at all of this?
There's an estimate that there's about 200 food decisions we make in a day. What to eat, how much to eat, did we like it? And it's so kind of second nature to us. I think we often sort of forget these things, but just interesting phenomena, like one of my favorites is called sensory-specific satiety. That basically means, the moment you begin eating something, your liking for that thing actually begins to decrease. It's kind of cruel, really. I mean, you gear up for a meal that you're excited about, you're very excited, you're happy, you start to eat it, you begin to become a little bit full, your liking, your body is telling you, okay, you've had enough of this, time to move on to something else, so you get enough nutrients. But, it definitely kind of, you wish the pleasure could just kind of keep on going and keep on going. But, I mean, the good news is at the end of a big meal, because of sensory-specific satiety, you're still happy to have dessert because it's something different. As full as you are, dessert with this nice sugar still sounds pretty appetizing.
Which kind of gives credence to the idea that there's a lot to the anticipation of it all, because once you get it, it quickly becomes less desirable.
Exactly. So much of our kind of liking of experiences is either anticipation or memory, and how we kind of feel about both those things. And one researcher suggested to me, when you go to a restaurant, if you want to create something memorable, order something new, because that's going to leave a stronger memory. If you want to sort of anticipate and enjoy the experience more in the moment, order something you've had before, because it will be familiar and you don't have to sort of think about what it is. But for a more memorable experience, go with something new. And this probably applies to all kinds of things besides food.
Yeah. Well, it sure isn't black and white at all, is it? I mean, there's lots of shades of gray to all of this. Tom Vanderbilt is author of the book You May Also Like, Taste in an Age of Endless Choice. He's also the author of a really interesting book called Traffic, Why We Drive the Way We Do, We'll have to have you back to talk about that another time. There's a link to Tom's book on the show notes page for this episode of the podcast on our website, which I'd love to have you visit. It is somethingyoushouldknow.net. Thanks, Tom.
All right, sure. Thank you.
Passive-aggressive behavior. Who hasn't engaged in that a time or two, or been the recipient of someone else engaging in that? The problem of passive-aggressive behavior is actually getting worse, in part because of the way we communicate or don't communicate through text and email and that sort of thing. It's certainly a problem worth looking at, and I've got the perfect person to look at it. It is Congressman Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, and in addition to being a congressman, he is also a psychologist and author of the book, Overcoming Passive Aggression, How to Stop Hidden Anger from Spoiling Your Relationships, Career, and Happiness. Welcome, Congressman, and let me ask you to start with just defining what you consider passive aggression. What is that?
Well, passive-aggressive behavior is being harmful or aggressive or mean to someone, usually by not doing things or not doing things directly or making another person's life difficult or having someone else be the sword that's not in your hand. In other words, you can do a lot of aggressive and underhanded things to someone by just making life miserable for them. So that's a way that sometimes everybody does it at some moments, not returning a call, doing things late, kind of semi-intentionally not getting something from the store, or sometimes just not being nice to someone you should be. But it gets pathological when it becomes a way of life, when it interferes with relationships, where it can be harmful in a marriage or in a family or destroying a friendship. And it can also be used in something in the workplace just to make your coworkers miserable, or in the worst scenarios, even bring down a company when one or more people start attacking back at the company with their own grudges.
But what's the difference between, as I hear you say that, I've been in situations where I haven't done anything just because it's like, it's too exhausting, I'm tired of this, I'm through, and so screw this. And so I don't respond, or I don't return the phone call or the email. Am I being passively aggressive when it's not that I'm trying to screw the guy, I'm tired of it?
Well, it may depend on your motivations and what's the outcome. If in a situation like that, you said to someone, look, this isn't working out, or whatever the situation is, we're not communicating, it's best if we just break off the contract or not communicate anymore, that's one thing. But when it is, I'm just tired of talking with this person, and I don't want to be direct, and I want to avoid the conversation, and I'm not going to set limits, then it's a little bit more passive-aggressive. Now, that being said, sometimes a person's already done this. They said, look, I've already told this person 5, 10 times to back off, stop this, and they're just not responding. And then the direct action is to say, look, I am just not going to respond to you anymore. This is not going the right way. You're not handling this right, so my next non-actions for you are directed towards that. So you still take the same action, but you take an ownership for it, and you let the person know why that action is happening.
So where's the line? Where's the line between, I guess people would have to define that for themselves.
Well, I guess when you start to see that as problematic. Now, most people don't see it in themselves. They may see it more readily in another person and may come out first with just a sense of uncomfortableness because you're not really sure it's happening, because the really good manipulative passive-aggressive person, you don't really know it until it's a little bit too late. But when you can identify those kinds of things and you bring it up front and handle it, that's good. When the person continues to make life miserable or difficult, then quite frankly, that's bad. And that's when, if you've spoken up and you've tried to change it and it's still not responding, then the misery builds up.
Why is it my job to speak up? Why isn't it their job to fix this?
Well, because things oftentimes just simply don't change on their own. I mean, there are some times when we just have to accept that this is the way things are, that when they say that suffering is mandatory, misery is an option. And that being the case, if the suffering continues on and you've tried and take steps in it, the other person isn't going to change, sometimes you just have to accept that that person is not going to change, or the situation at work isn't going to change, or whatever cards that you've been dealt in life isn't going to change, because life just isn't fair. And that's the way things sometimes go. You do what you can. You use all your efforts. You muster up your courage and fortitude to do things, but you don't really have control over how another person behaves.
People who express passive aggression, it probably doesn't exist in a vacuum. Are there other things that those people that have a real problem with this have in common? Are there situations where this is more? Put it in a context for me.
Well, there can be some situations where things are deteriorating. Let's take a marriage that is deteriorated, and people may start to use passive-aggressive actions. Perhaps their communication skills have deteriorated. They've not been spending time together. They start to needle each other and start to play games with the money, with finances, with time, or if there is a divorce, manipulating the kids. Those are some of the ways that those things play out. But there can be some personality characteristics which also leave a person more prone to this. I mean, if someone's chronically irritable or pretty self-absorbed or narcissistic, vain, if they have their own low self-esteem and they don't really have the courage or the skill set to confront someone face-to-face, and so they'll let things simmer a little bit longer, they'll let problems brew, even when they know the problems are going to occur the other person to them. They won't want to address it directly. And sometimes it's social maturity. Sometimes it's the person may be involved in an addictive behavior, and rather than confront their own addictions and problems, they'll let the other person, they'll constantly try and blame the other person. So there's lots of different avenues that passive-aggressive behavior can come through. Sometimes,
though, passive-aggressive behavior, I can think of circumstances where it's deliberate and quite satisfying.
Sure. I mean, it could be things where it can be satisfying, and that can be the naturalness of it because it can be pretty self-rewarding.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like someone that way. You know, if you just kind of forget to tell someone, oh, by the way, you got a phone call, and it was the call they're waiting for, and it means that this person, it's going to cost them. Maybe they don't get their flight, maybe they don't get the job, maybe they don't get that discount they wanted. Yeah, you can feel somewhat smug and satisfied, but I ask, is that really the way you want to live? It could be that person never finds out you were the one. It could be they do. And that satisfaction for the moment, I guess it really comes down to what kind of standard do you want to set for yourself in life to do that.
Yeah, well, that's pretty mean to help along someone miss a flight or lose a job, but sometimes in less intense situations, it can. I can just think of a few in my life where not telling somebody or not returning a call. It's been maybe they made me wait 5 days for a call, so I'll let them wait 5 days for a call.
Sure, and I guess it comes down to here the issue of doing it to others, and is that what you really want them to do to you? You can let them set the standard of being irrational and nasty and delaying, or you can try and raise the standard. What's happening in our society overall, and this is not just me, but this is reports talking about whether it's an increasing suicide rate or irritability rate or people going to more counselors, is that people recognize in one another this meanness that has grown more in our culture over the last couple of decades. Even social media has made it worse. The things that are said on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, where people can just kind of say things almost anonymously and make someone's life miserable, are all part of the way that our society has just become a lot more grumpy and nasty to each other, and we mistake getting back at someone with a quality relationship. And it really isn't what we want, is it? I mean, it's just, why would we want to continue to reinforce that idea? Now, again, if someone's being mean to you, it's best to confront it up front, and a lot of us are simply not comfortable with it, especially in a social media world where we're not even used to talking on the phone or face-to-face with someone. We send them a text message. We send them a tweet. We make that conversation as brief as possible. Maybe the most we do with emotions is add a little emoticon with it, but none of that is good adaptive over time. That may help you to say, hey, meet you at the theater at 7:30, but not so much as saying, you're making me miserable today, and I don't really want to talk to you. Well, that's not going to solve the problem. And so let's not mistake that getting even with someone is getting ahead with someone.
Yeah. Well, you said a couple things I wanted to ask you about. So you said, do you want to raise the standard or lower the standard? But does it work? I mean, if you're dealing with a jerk, you're not going to raise the standard of the relationship. A jerk's a jerk.
Sure, but if someone is being mean and nasty, sometimes you say, I'm not going to come down to your level, and it's okay to state that right up front. Look, the way you're behaving towards me, the way I see you behaving towards other people, I'm not going to communicate with you. I'm going to block that off. Now, if that person's a coworker, sometimes you have to step it up and go to the next level, talking to a boss or supervisor, saying, I want to transfer out of this, I don't want to deal with this. And sometimes it's the ongoing frustration saying, look, I'm just not going to talk to you, because whenever we do that, it ends up being frustrating. Yeah, we are dealt hands sometimes in life where we are working. Got coworkers who just mean. I mean, heck, look what I do for a living. I work with some great people, but I also work with some people that I recognize. They spend their time trying to raise money to take your job away. Luckily, most people are good in the world. But that happens in other settings I've worked in. I've worked in hospitals where that occurs. I've worked in clinic where that occurs. In other business situations, yeah, sometimes there is a person who's just behaving like a jerk. But think of this, though. You don't have to behave like them. That's the choice you have. And then have other people say, well, that guy's a jerk, too. Why do I want to be around him? That's your choice.
You also said, though, that a big part of this is, and you gave the example of, we text people when we should be having conversations and things, but we don't have the courage. Well, if you don't have the courage, where do you get the courage? I mean, it's tough when you have to confront somebody and get in their face about something, even in a nice way, when it's it's hard for a lot of us.
Sure, it is hard for a lot of us, but you get that courage by practice and by doing it and realizing it's not so hard. Because sometimes we're afraid of talking in relationships because we just don't know how to do it. So if one is terrible at it, sometimes what you do is you get some help. You talk to a friend, you talk to a counselor, you read about it. But when you work at it, it gives you strength. It takes courage to talk to someone. It takes courage to be honest. And yes, there's fear involved. There's fear with being alone. There's fear of failure. But you do it anyways. You try anyways, and you have some successes and have failures, and not be burdened by a catastrophizing of perfectionism. Says, if I don't do this right, my whole life falls apart. You take steps, and in life, if we just stay in this cocoon of non-involvement and non-communication and poor communication, our skill set gets worse, and that builds up to be more and more problematic in relationships.
And is this problem getting worse? It must be when you think about people, having fights with on text messages and things. I mean, this has got to be getting worse, not better.
I think passive-aggressive behavior is getting worse, and people are using this as oftentimes their primary communication technique as a way of averting direct communication going around it. I mean, the reason our book is, I think, selling is because people recognizing that passive aggression is so toxic and so pervasive and so growing that people are finding it's conflicting in their relationships with friends, in their marriage, in their work, and they don't know what to do. There are certainly a lot more outlets for being passive-aggressive than there is with that direct eye-to-eye contact and communication.
So just to jump back a question or two, people are afraid of that confrontation or that face-to-face. What is it we're afraid of?
Well, it can be several things. It is the emotional uncomfortableness of talking. Men sometimes are a lot more uncomfortable talking about feelings. And I don't mean to be totally stereotyped there, but one of the common conflicts you hear in marriage counseling is the woman says, look, can you just listen to me? I don't need you to jump in with solutions. Will you just listen to me? And the guy says, look, that's what you do with your friends all the time. All you do is complain all the time. I'll give you a solution. And so it's the uncomfortableness with jumping out of your own your comfort zone, that set of skills that you have. And sometimes you have to be strong enough to say, I'm going to listen another way. I might fail. We get so used to this in relationships that we're just not used to talking with even people that are closest to us. We talk about things. We talk about events of the day, what we saw at the store, what we saw in a game, politics, whatever it is. We talk about things. But direct communications, we just aren't skilled at. And it probably that fear that maybe I'm not going to do so good. Maybe I'm going to fail. But you know what? It isn't that hard. But when there's conflict and we think, I don't want to have an angry relationship. I don't want to have an argument today. Just avoiding it, yeah, there's some uncomfortableness there. But boy, it can build over time to make things worse.
Yeah, but I think what you just said is true, that when you are passively aggressive, at least you avoid the fight at the moment.
At the moment, but it builds up. So when you look at the stages of anger, there's the buildup, the spark, the explosion, and the aftermath. The buildup can be minutes, hours, days, months, or years. Think of what happens between holidays. Someone may have a bad thing that happens at a family reunion at holiday time, and it simmers for the next year. Sometimes it's things that have happened at work over days, the way someone's behaved, not done their projects on time, left you hanging, not giving you information that was vital. Some spark occurs eventually, which leads to this explosion. An explosion can be a knockdown, drag-out fist fight in the extreme. It can be a screaming match, or it can be now a lot of intentional things. I'm going to get back at this person. I'm going to fix them. I'm going to do these things to them. I'm going to not do these things to them. I'm going to show them it's toxic. And so just because one person may have avoided that toxic confrontation at the moment, the toxic things still build up. It makes your life miserable. You go home grumpy. You kick the dog. You yell at the kids. You shout at the person in rush hour traffic with you. All those things are making us miserable. And then what that does in terms of leading to sleep problems, leading to heart problems, in proneness towards infection, proneness towards illness, it's destroying us physically. So why carry those burdens? Better take care of them and stop it in the passive-aggressive game and learn to communicate clearly with each other. And there's things in our book that even talk about when a person doesn't want to communicate with you, how you can build those things up bit by bit over time, directly or indirectly.
I can also imagine, though, that you could kind of get, if you did this all the time, that you would kind of get the reputation of, geez, does this guy let anything go? I mean, can't he overlook anything? Does he have to argue about everything? I mean, sometimes in a store you might get upset with the customer service rep who you're never, ever going to see again. Maybe it's just better to let it go. And maybe that is somewhat passive-aggressive, but it just avoids, there's no consequence, though.
Well, if you're dealing with someone who says, look, I'm just going to see this person one time, conflict in my life, let this whole thing drop. I don't need to confront it. Yeah, that could be so. Sometimes it's helpful, though, to pen a letter to the store owner or manager or customer services. Look, maybe the person was just having a bad day, but, here's a little lesson from this. I don't think it helps when someone writes one of those letters, I was just treated the worst I've ever been treated in my life, and this terrible thing, and attacking some poor minimum wage worker who's, themselves overworked and trying to make their ends meet. Look at it from their standpoint, too. And sometimes you do walk away and say, maybe the person's just having a bad day, let it go. But sometimes just a very slight conversation, especially if it's disarming. It doesn't have to be, hey, I don't appreciate being treated like that. Stop talking to me like that. Sometimes it's very simple, like saying, are you okay? You having a bad day? Is there a better way we can solve this problem? I have watched people in stores and other places deal with customer service who have ended up increasing the conflict in the situation to the point that someone says, I'm going to call security and get you out of here. Or for the same thing, end up getting their things refunded, getting it taken care of, getting it done with a smile, even with the same person in line. A lot of it depends on how we both handle those things. And ultimately, you ask yourself, do I want to go home miserable, or do I want to go home maybe less than satisfied but not carrying this grudge? The point is you learn to where you're going to draw the line of what you want to carry within yourself, too, and how much you really want to attack back.
Well, that's a lot to think about, especially in light of the fact, as you say, that the problem is getting worse, not better, and we've all done this, and we've committed the act of passive aggression, and we've also all been on the receiving end of it. Appreciate your time, Tim. Tim Murphy is a psychologist. He is author of the book Overcoming Passive Aggression, and then he is also a congressman from the state of Pennsylvania. I appreciate your time, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Rock, paper, scissors. It has resolved many a dispute, and you may not know, but there is actually science behind rock, paper, scissors that can dramatically increase your chances of winning. Because when scientists have studied how people play, they play in very predictable patterns. For example, if a player that you're playing beats you, the probability of that person repeating the same action in the next play is considerably higher than the probability of that person shifting to something else. Also, if a player has lost two times in a row, that person is much more likely to shift their play and more likely to shift their play to the thing that will beat the one thing that has just beaten them. Got it? So the best way to win at rock, paper, scissors is if you lose the first round, switch to the thing that beats the thing your opponent just played, because they're most likely to play it again. If you win, don't keep playing the same thing, but instead switch to the thing that would beat the thing that you just played. In other words, play the hand that your losing opponent just played. And if you stick to that, you'll most likely win that game of rock, paper, scissors. That's the podcast today. I appreciate you listening. If you'd like to hear more episodes, I invite you to visit our website, somethingyoушouldknow.net. And of course, you can also subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play or wherever you like to listen to podcasts, and that way you won't miss a single episode. I'm Mike Carruthers. Thanks for listening today to Something You Should Know.